My father had been district attorney in the Hill Country when President Johnson was a boy, and consequently, President Johnson knew who he was and respected him, and told me one time that when my father came to Johnson City for trials, that he would play hooky and go sit in the courtroom and watch those trials. This was a huge district, and my father had to go from county to county to try these bootlegger cases and murder cases and everything else. And President Johnson told me, he said, every boy in Johnson City was scared to death of George Christian, meaning, I guess, that he was a tough DA. But he felt a certain affection for my family, and that showed in the way he treated all of us. When I moved my family to Washington in 1966, he flew us on Air Force One from Texas. He was in Texas and flying home, so rather than flying up commercial, he brought all of us up on the plane, including an African-American woman who had worked for my family on and off for years, and who had helped us from time to time, my wife and I, when we lived in Austin. Agnes Brown, one of the greatest ladies that ever lived. We asked her to go to Washington with us for a few weeks to help us get settled in. And so she rode Air Force One. She had never been on an airplane, never been out of the state of Texas. And the first time she did it, she was flying on the presidential plane, Air Force One. She was sitting in the back of the plane with one of my sons, who was a little bit frightened of flying. And President Johnson, when he asked me where everybody was, and I told him, he went back to the back cabin and stood there and talked to Agnes for a good while, which I thought was a class act. He had a generosity streak that has often been overlooked. When he thought about it, you know, and he was so busy that sometimes he didn't think about it, but when he thought about it, he could be not only thoughtful, but generous. And obviously always funny, always telling stories, always relating something to events that had happened during his boyhood or early days, or similarities with people who lived in the Hill Country with him. He would sometimes baffle people who weren't from Texas about some of the things he said. He had always chubbed me a little because my father had worked for Dan Moody, who was Attorney General of Texas and then governor, and was opposed to the Fergusons, Jim Ferguson and Miriam Ferguson, Ma Ferguson, who Dan Moody defeated in the governor's race. Well, President Johnson's father and family had been Ferguson people, so he would chide me about my Dan Moody connection rather than the Fergusons. And I walked in the cabinet room one day when the cabinet was there. He was at a regular cabinet meeting. And I walked into the middle of a story he was telling about the Fergusons, and Jim Ferguson. And when he saw me, he looked up, he said, "Well, you wouldn't like this, you're a Moody man." And that's all he said. Well, these guys in the room, they didn't have any idea what he was talking about. I don't think they'd ever thought I was particularly moody, but to him, it meant something. to them, they didn't have the slightest idea what he was talking about. But he would always, when he talked about Texas politics, somehow the Fergusons got into it. And the Fergusons were among the, most ethically challenged governors that Texas had had. There was a great highway scandal and a great prison parole scandal during their administrations, and Jim Ferguson had actually been impeached by the Texas legislature, but he was loyal to the Fergusons. He was loyal to his folks at home. He had a lot of friends in the Hill Country and environs. He had a lot of friends in Austin. He stayed in touch with them. He included them. He invited them to Washington to functions. He saw them when he was at home. He had a wide circle of friends and admirers in Texas. And I think maybe that he loved them best. And he was sometimes criticized for having too many Texans on his staff. This was probably because he succeeded presidents who, maybe because of where they were from, or or maybe they didn't have a home, like President Eisenhower, in effect, really had not settled in any particular place for very long. The people around him came from all over the place. The people around President Kennedy generally came from the Northeast, but not all of them from Massachusetts. Massachusetts didn't have that many people to go to the White House, I guess, and he drew them off from other places. President Johnson had a Texas base when he was in the Congress. He had Texans generally helping him. He carried that on through, and he did have a staff of a number of Texans. This caused some humor around Washington, you know, that this was just just a Texanized administration. And in some ways, I guess it was. I know when I wanted to appoint Lloyd Hackler as my assistant press secretary, I prepared a press release identifying him as having been born in White Cloud, Oklahoma, you know, and mentioned a few other things he'd done. And I gave it to the press, and as I was making my announcement, somebody said, another Texan? And I said, he was born in, as you'll notice, he was born in White Cloud, Oklahoma. And somebody else piped up and said, but moved to Texas at an early age. So that was our reputation. The term cronyism was rampant during the Johnson administration, largely because he had so many friends that he had confidence in, that, and many of them Texans, that it was just natural that people would say he's appointing his cronies. Well, he hated that word, but his friendships, because of his long days in Washington, his friendships certainly included people from other places. He had total confidence in Abe Fortas, who had been his private lawyer on communication matters and other things earlier on. And certainly Abe was not a Texan. He had great friendship for Arthur Krim, who was the head of United Artists, and his wife, who's one of the country's great bacteriologists. They were from New York. He had a lot of friendships like that, people who were really close to him, spent a lot of time with him at the White House. But still, that Texas cronyism thing stuck to him. And I must say that he seemed to feel more comfortable around people from his neck of the woods. I think I had a good relationship with him, at least in partly, maybe in large part, because I was from Austin, from his home territory, and also had come off Governor John Connally's staff. And he had such confidence in Connally that I think I got a running start simply because I worked for Connally. I thought when he invited Larry Temple, who was Connally's chief of staff, to come to Washington later, it was almost as if John Connally was providing the farm team for the big leagues in the White House, and that was true to a considerable extent.
Okay, thanks.
Oh, this is one of the pictures from the other night that I think is personal that was left in the scanner.